I am actually an optimist when it comes to the overall direction that we're heading. I think we're in a unique circumstance right now of where the overall party influences are having an impact that is outsized of what they're meant to be, and it's making it difficult for direct representative democracy. But I do think that the social wheels are turning in terms of addressing that and finding new ways to reflect it. And I think that ultimately, our system, as fallible as it can be, is still something that is completely salvageable and workable and can do a lot of good for a lot of people. And
100%.
And I just always have hope that, I do not believe America is doomed. I think our best years are actually ahead of us, and the right collection of people coming together and working together and recognizing that they have differences, but working to overcome those, that is our greatest strength. And that's something that, countries around the globe have aimed to replicate. And that's something where we can take pride in that. There is always an opportunity to recapture that and start working back towards it.
Howdy, welcome to the Texas Forward Podcast. This week, I had a chance to catch up with Dylan MacInerney. Dylan was one of the first people that I met when I got involved with Forward, and it was great catching up with him. He is the vice president at the Mach 1 Group. They're a PR firm that focuses on public affairs and crisis management. And earlier in his career, Dylan spent several years working as a staffer on Capitol Hill. We had a fantastic conversation on how social media has changed the game in terms of messaging and communication, and what the Forward Party can do to separate itself from the two major parties and grow our following by honing our messaging and our communication style. Learning from one of the best. Really enjoyed this conversation with Dylan. Hope you do too. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Hope you enjoy the conversation. We'll see you in there. Dylan MacInerney.
How's it going?
It's been a while, man.
It has been a while. I'm remembering back to the time we met up for drinks at the Driscoll. That was good times. I think that was 2 years ago now, or something like that.
Really?
It feels like it, at least. I mean, time is an illusion thanks to post-pandemic stuff, but it's gone by so fast.
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, I want to welcome everybody to the Texas Forward Podcast. And before we get started with Dylan here, I want to give our listeners actually a special challenge this week. So we've been doing this for about 2 months, and every week we're getting new subscribers, we're getting new listeners. Thank you for anybody who listens to this podcast. Thank you so much for your support. But what we've got for you this week is a special challenge. If you could share this podcast with one other person and give us a 5-star rating on whatever your platform of choice is, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. If you believe what the Forward Party is all about, you support this movement, you support this podcast, that would help us out so much. We want to continue growing and continue spreading this message. So thank you again to everybody listening. Thanks for letting me do that.
Of course. Absolutely.
Quick plug there, Dylan. But most importantly, tell us about you. So you are the vice president at the Mach 1 Group. Tell us about what you do there.
Yeah, so we are an Austin-based PR and strategic communications firm here in Austin, and we work on the gambit of communications and messaging issues, both political, non-political, traditional PR firm, but also very focused on government-related aspects as well. So we can really dive into some of the areas of legislative advocacy and messaging on that. And I'm on the client management and business development side of those things. Work with our CEO, Catherine McLean, former U.S. education press secretary, and founded the firm about 10 years ago. And we work with clients across the political spectrum, helping get their positions properly messaged and communicated to whichever audience they're trying to work with. And it's just been an absolute blessing to work with this firm, and working with Catherine and our CEO Mary, just excellent team. And it's a fantastic place to be.
It sounds so fascinating. Not having had any political experience before, getting involved with Forward. I never really thought about how complex this ecosystem is, and that there are these different, consulting firms, PR firms that are really the kind of the brains behind the operation in a lot of these cases on things like messaging or, whatever the case may be, collecting data. So are you strictly focused on politics? Do you work with private sector at all, or what's the client base?
Yeah, so we are a multi-client firm. We work with nonprofits, we work with private organizations, and a lot of the issues that come to us, we are made up entirely of former government staffers or news reporters, but we will cover political issues, we will cover non-political issues, and just about anything in between. And so, any organization or any person that is looking at PR representation or communications messaging, particularly crisis, we do a lot of work with clients that are going through a specific messaging or reputation crisis and helping them navigate through that. And so that's our general bread and butter. But we consider ourselves to be one of the premier shops in the Texas network, looking to make that in the country, and working with clients across the political spectrum and the issue area.
Nice. So you are strictly focused on Texas then?
So this is actually something that's been pretty exciting lately. We've been starting to pick up clients that, they will start in Texas, but we've actually seen such success with the campaigns that we've been working on that we are now expanding to statewide campaigns in other parts of the country as well. So,
very exciting.
Yeah. So, without going into too much specifics, we are beginning to work on campaigns that will drop in other states, reach into their media networks and their media markets and start presenting that messaging, lining up interviews, presenting arguments to different legislative bodies. And it's just a really exciting time. And, typically Texas legislative session is our busy season. And now we're starting to get to that point where it feels like, no, it's just always busy season.
Yeah. Well, the legislative session, it's got to be wrapping up soon, right?
Mm-hmm. I think it's 16 days now to sine die, which there's going to be some political staffer out there who's going to have the exact days, hours, minutes, and seconds counting down on this. Who's just like, he's got it wrong.
Who's counting?
Yeah, but it's hard to believe that from the beginning of the legislative session months ago to now where we are here, it's gone by so fast, and it is just tremendously busy. But it's also something of where that's where we do our best work. That's where we really have the opportunity to present our clients' messages to them and get that forward. And it's an exciting time. It's exhausting. I know my wife is very much looking forward to having legislative session done, but
I'm sure.
it's something of where every 2 years we get right back at it.
Interesting. So when you talk about reaching out of state a little bit, so is this to give an example, not to say that you're doing this, I know you can't really talk too much about specifics today. Would this be, you see a lot more of this in politics these days, where something like abortion, we'll be talking about what's happening in Florida when we live in Texas, and it'll be making our local newspapers. When you talk about reaching out of state, is it for things like that, or could you give me some more examples? Of
that's a great question. And what we see in the media markets today, it's driven a lot by social media, but also more traditional media like cable news and newspapers, where the politics of the different states are now becoming more and more interconnected.
Yeah.
What one state does will wind up having a motivating influence on what other states do or do not do.
Sure.
And so, without going into specifics, working with a particular client of where we've seen great success with our campaign here in Texas, and now we're looking to replicate that campaign in other states, and then we're going to point to Texas and say, look, this is how Texas is doing it. Here is all of the great things that will happen that we've already seen in Texas. Now we're going to recreate that, but cater it to the specific media market of that state. Because the important thing to remember in any communications package is always going to be know your audience, know where they're at, and be able to present that in a way that is accessible to them. So, what we're going to be doing in just a hypothetical situation, if I want to go into the Kentucky media market, there will be similarities there with Texas based on like their political background, that sort of thing. But the unique aspects of what makes Kentucky is going to be a lot different than, what makes Texas, like, as far as like being the Lone Star State or the Alamo or the political decision-making processes that have defined the state thus far. And so that's the interesting challenge of branching into those campaigns.
Yeah. So, with that example, so a state like Texas and Kentucky, which, by the way, I've actually lived in both of those states.
No kidding, really?
As I'm thinking about it, I'm like, there actually are a lot of similarities. They both people say y'all a lot. Yep. Both like horses.
I mean, I don't know about the horses. Those things kind of scare me a bit.
Really?
Yeah, no, horses, just one kick and it's lights out.
True.
I'm going to carefully dodge that. And then I will, granted, I drove here, so I'm not sure if the safety comparison is much better there.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it's a rainy day. You got to be careful out there. So all that's to say, so basically what you're saying is like 3/4 of the work when you're, depending on the issue, right? If their state has similar politics, it's like a large portion of what you do is already kind of taken care of, and then you have to just put the nuances there on the top.
So I mean, you're going if you take it a step back and look at how we start with an individual client, the first thing we're going to do is go through a discovery process and figuring out what their core messaging is going to be.
Sure.
And so we're going to take that and look at it from the perspective of what are the 2, 3, 4 key facts that you want to present to your audience, and how do you want them to understand that? And then for each audience that we're going to put that out to, we will make adjustments. So say the audience is legislative body, you might start getting into a bit more of the technical stuff, a bit more of the legalese, versus if you are trying to get this to journalists and get it to the general media market, you might present a more narrative function on that. And so each of those little aspects are the things that you have to take into consideration. And a lot of what our job is to make sure that we have a firm understanding of what those unique little aspects are and how to tweak messaging to make sure that it fits that well.
Sure, that makes sense. So you talk about crisis management being kind of the focus of your firm. So you come in when, the wheels are falling off, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, so our founder, Texas A&M grad, who she actually worked on, and this might be dating myself a little bit, but if you remember the organization Livestrong. Yeah. So
yellow wristbands.
Yeah.
They were all the rage.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I had like 5 of those things growing up. But I think what a lot of people tend to forget, though, is the crisis that they went through during the Lance Armstrong scandal.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And, I think most people in that situation would presume this organization is not going to make it through. Our CEO was the head of the ship in terms of bringing that communications campaign out to help them right the ship. And they are now continuing operations. They have been for years. And, that's the kind of experience that we have on that. And, when we bring that to the table, that's something of where we can help with short campaigns, we can help with long campaigns. And each of those has its own unique little factors in terms of what communications you're going to be presenting and the speed at which you're going to be getting those out. And, I'm nerding out about this, but, it's an area where there is unique challenges in every single aspect. And communications is just so critical for any aspect of any organization, whether it's political or not.
Yeah.
Having a firm message that you are trying to get across. It does not matter how good your product is. It does not matter how good your policy is. If you do not have effective messaging, you are not going to be able to get people to buy into what you're trying to get them to buy into.
Sure. So when you're engaging with these entities, we'll call them, are you focused more on high level strategy, or are you more of a tactician with them? It seems like we were talking about this before the podcast. There's so many different aspects to crafting messaging, right? It's like writing copy and SEO and social media and the different news outlets. And the list goes on and on and on. And it's like you could be an expert on any one of those. Yep. And then there's the strategy, right? It's like the Livestrong example, I'm sure there was, a huge portion of that was like creative strategy. How do we, tackle this? But where do you fit in on that stuff?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing to note is that, each organization, each person that we work with is in their own unique situation.
Right.
And that's part of our process as we go through the discovery to see okay, what have they done so far? What haven't they done? Do they have an overarching strategy, or do we need to come in and provide that? We are a full level shop. We can do top level strategy and just let them manage it from there. Mm-hmm. Or we can do just, the ground level stuff where we're helping coordinate with interviews, we're helping create copy content for op-eds and the like, but they manage top level strategy. Or we can do everything in between. We can do it all, and it's one of those things of where each client has their own unique needs that they need for that, and we seek to address that in the way that best fits them, because at the end of the day, it's still their message, and it's still something that they need to be the ones communicating it.
Do you ever have clients that don't know quite what they want their message to be, but they're just like, we want, X number of people to buy our product, or to increase our revenue, or to, have this many people supporting this piece of legislation? Do you ever have that?
Yeah, I mean, I think oftentimes, everyone has an idea of what they want.
Yeah.
But sometimes they might not have a firm picture of what are the steps that they need to achieve that.
Yeah.
And so we work with them on that to help develop that. And sometimes they have a very clear idea of what that is. Here are the steps they just need help implementing. Other times, it is a bit more of a strategy session and figuring out just exactly, okay, would you prefer this? Would you like to message on this particular aspect? And, it's a unique experience with each and every client, and we cater that to them to make sure that it's getting them what they need.
Of course.
And sometimes that does involve tough conversations of where sometimes folks have ideas, and our industry expertise is going to tell us, well,
that's a bad idea.
Yeah, look, believe it or not, there is such a thing as bad ideas in communications, and but we also understand the means of doing that in a delicate and sensitive manner that continues to respect our relationship with them, and also helps them be proactive in that too.
Well, you're a communications expert, right? So you know how to talk to people and tiptoe around egos and whatnot.
I'm going to start telling my wife that now. I am a communications expert. That's going to go over great.
I bet I can see it now.
I mean, look, I come from a perspective where I've worked in government for about a decade now in some way, shape, or form, whether it's in or next to 5 years on Capitol Hill in D.C., a couple of years working for the state, and now here at the Mach 1 group, which is more government adjacent a lot of times. But, it is something of where, expertise is something that, it is constantly having to be renewed. It's something that we are always learning new tactics, new strategies, new methods. I mean, especially when you look at social media markets and that sort of thing, these things change rapidly, and the audiences change rapidly sometimes. And being able to pivot on that is something that we really take pride on in terms of being able to manage that while still maintaining a really comprehensive messaging strategy as well.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like a fascinating job.
Oh, I love my job. It's fantastic.
Because it seems like no two clients, no two situations are probably even remotely similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, and granted, we go to extreme cautions to make sure that we're not doing anything where clients might intersect on something.
Yeah. But
it is something of where when you start getting into weeds of stuff and you start having conversations with people, you really come to realize just the widespread spectrum of issues that are out there. We work with nonprofits that are focused on particular fundraising for particular disease research and that sort of thing. And we work with very specific policy issue groups. And we've also worked with ones that are just more general advocacy groups in a particular area. And each of them have their own unique factors. And it's something that, coming up in government, you oftentimes have your own perspectives of how things are and how things should be.
Yeah.
Getting to interact with folks like this on a daily basis and just see those different perspectives and seeing how their little pocket of the world works is really fascinating. And it's just something where I love diving into that. And all the while, I'm a writer at heart. And so being able to help craft messaging documents and talking points for them is just really, really fascinating.
Definitely. Well, that writing background, I mean, that probably serves you quite well in this. Copy is, I would imagine, like the foundation of everything you do in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, what we really get into is about core messaging.
Yeah.
And it takes both a policy background of understanding what the issues are, while also having enough of a creative mindset to think about unique ways of presenting that might not be readily apparent. And it
get the people's attention, right?
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
What word is going to pop in this market with these, folks we're trying to reach.
And, that's a key issue to touch on right there. It's a key issue to reach of the audience that you're trying to reach, the people you're trying to reach. That can vary for each message that you're trying to put out there. That can vary for each campaign that we work on. And it's important to be able to recognize that and also operate campaigns around that as well, of where what you are saying to one group of people might totally work for them. And it might be the exact same issue that you're talking about, but you have to reframe it in a totally different way.
Yeah.
An example that comes to mind is listening in on sessions for clean energy groups. They can present it as, saving climate action, climate justice, that sort of thing for folks that tend to lean on the left side of the political spectrum. Yeah. And they will immediately get pickup. They'll immediately get attention. They try and take that same message to folks that lean more right-wise, who might be a little more skeptical on that. They've figured out...
Tune out immediately.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly right. They tune it out. Like, they will actively shut down, not just like politely listen, but no, they will reject it. Versus when they've recognized that if they present this more about, this is about providing additional energy security. This is about creating opportunities for more business.
Jobs, energy independence.
Exactly, yeah. Exact same issue, exact same windmill that's being installed, exact same solar panels that are being installed, totally different messaging.
Yeah.
And so often being able to recognize the instances where you need to make those slight alterations to your message is crucial in terms of being able to draw in a wide audience.
Absolutely. Because there's just so many landmine phrases these days.
Yeah.
In politics in particular, the way how polarized things have become.
Well, I mean, in politics or just in everyday life, I think a lot of people feel like there's just words they cannot say.
Yeah.
There are phrases they don't want to venture into. And it's something of where being able to understand communications, understanding messaging on that can be critical for just navigating the world as it is right now.
Everyday life.
Yeah.
Having hard conversations with people and, being able to communicate because we need to talk about these issues, not only in political situations, but, anything that comes up in your life. Communication is such an important thing, being able to be heard, being able to hear the other person, understand their point of view and where your differences are, and navigate that without just it turning into a fight because there was some word that or way of framing something that just immediately made it us versus them.
Yeah. And, when you find yourself in a situation of where, you're jumping onto the more tribal aspects of that, it is very easy to push somebody back into their tribe, back into their corner. And then, it just shuts down conversation. It makes it very difficult to have those conversations in general. And so often it's on stuff that typically I think most people could find a reasonable agreement on in everyday life. In politics, it's a whole other ballgame. But, I think it's something where a lot of people are recognizing that these days, of where it's harder to talk to people about everyday things because things just feel so charged and so hyped right now.
Yeah, and it's like we almost just need, and this is, I'm sure, what you deal with every day, just like a new way of talking about the issues that we talk about. So, I know you're not allowed to get into specifics today. We want to stay away from that. But, let's say there was a new third party that was being run by like a former presidential candidate.
That's quite a hypothetical.
Yeah, it's super hypothetical.
Yeah, that's
completely hypothetical. But in that situation, how would you advise messaging there? This is something you and I had talked about prior. is kind of staying away from the hot button phrases, kind of feeds into what we were just saying, and presenting things in a new way, but we're ultimately having the same conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first off, you do have to take it all the way back of what we were talking about earlier of audience identification. Recognizing the folks that you were talking to. I mean, and I'm sure you've seen these poll results of where I think it's now about 49% of Americans are self-identifying as independents.
Yeah.
And, for this hypothetical third party, that would be something of where there's your audience, but you do have to take a deeper dive into that as well, recognizing that, there are certain groups of people that are going to refer to themselves as independents because they think that the party that they would typically support is actually not going far enough. And, it's also something where oftentimes some parties have gotten just such a negative association for some people that they just refuse to acknowledge affiliation, even though that they might traditionally vote according to that party. And so as far as developing a message on that, having that information, being able to take a deeper dive on recognizing that audience, I would say that's first step.
Right.
From there, then it's about crafting that message in a way that reaches them and more specifically reaches them where they are. I think very often what we will hear from folks looking for our help is, well, I want to start up a social media campaign. I want this to go viral. When in reality, what their goals are, it might not necessarily be necessary or even helpful, in fact, for them to dive into social media or go viral because it might attract the wrong kind of attention. And that's another key step I would note is recognize your goals, acknowledge what is the kind of attention you want. And, for organizations that are looking to upset the apple cart in politics right now, I think there might be an angle of where you can say, look, we are trying to present ourselves as the serious people in the room.
Yeah.
We are the folks that are trying to bring people together who want to live their everyday lives versus being caught up in this constant political storm where it just feels like there's a new issue every single day. And being able to do that, though, that's not something that's going to catch well on social media. Saying, I want to have reasoned conversations and have a opportunity for us to come in a meeting of the minds. That's not what social media does, for example.
It's not what the algorithm's like.
Yeah, exactly. And so that means you need to pick your battles in terms of where you're going to start presenting this message. So finding different ways to get that message out, whether it's working through a podcast or providing aspects through a more fleshed out ground game of where you are doing more of providing support to have one-on-one conversations or have those capabilities to discuss things in person and help branch that out, helping building out communities there that can become pillars of a larger organization itself, rather than relying on, what I think we see a lot in politics right now is that kind of viral sensation.
Shock factor.
Yeah.
100%. That's something that our politics seems to devolve more and more into, like every day. Trump, obviously, he probably won in 2016 largely because of his ability to work the media and control the narrative. And I think he famously had said that no news, all press is good press. Mm-hmm. Like any news, even if it's bad news, is good because it's getting him attention. And, clearly that's his philosophy and seems to have worked. It seems to have infected our politics to the point where now we have congressmen and congresswomen who are, dunking on each other on Twitter or taking these ridiculous, they would have been considered ridiculous, claims and positions just so they can get their, 10 seconds and get that attention. So it's like, what do we do about that?
Well, I think it's first off, it's going to take a large enough group of people being able to say, I am tired of this and tuning out. And one thing that I would look back to is just on the historical norms of major media changes is that after any major technological innovation in terms of media market, there has been a kind of Wild West period of where people are taking this new tool. So, you can trace this all the way back to the invention of the printing press, of where suddenly you have a new method of communication that allows previously unheard messages to get out there.
Yeah.
And eventually, things begin to stabilize, things begin to become the new normal because people are so used to it that it's just become part of their daily lives.
Shocking isn't shocking when everybody's being shocking.
Yeah.
Right?
Or if just, people begin to do the mental mathematics of being able to take it into account as well.
Sure.
And so, you can do this with printing press, you can do this with newspapers, you can do this with cable news. Each of them created this large bombastic effect in the short term. And when I say short term, I mean 10, 15, 20 years at least, of where there were major disruptions to the status quo in terms of what is media, what is messaging and communication. And, I think we are in a similar stage right now, and this is at least my opinion, that, we are still working through that both as a national and state society, but also on a worldwide scale too, of people just recognizing the different tools and characteristics that come with this new media system, particularly social media.
That's such an interesting point because you do see it, with the cable news. 49% of Americans identify as independents. Mm-hmm. People know what cable news is a lot more than they might have when it first came out. It's talking heads. It's, theater, right? It's, they have a spin, they're biased. I talk to a lot of people who watch, if there's a story, they look at what Fox News is saying and they look at what CNN is saying.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's even a podcast out there, Tangle, I think, that, they intentionally go out and take pieces from both sides of the major media markets and then present that. And, I think that's an excellent point of where people have recognized the old media system. And there's a saying that, people figure out how to win the previous generation of war right as the next generation of war approaches.
Interesting.
And that's something of where I think that's true with just about any technological aspect. And when it comes to media, the exact same thing is true. People have figured out cable news, which was the major breaking 24-hour news cycle period. And for the longest time, it was really difficult to master. And just as the political organizations began to figure out this is how we best present on this, social media made its appearance, upset the apple cart. And I think we're still going through that learning phase right now of how different organizations best do their outreach on these different platforms.
Fascinating. Yeah, with the social media stuff, like the doing things for the clicks, doing things to go viral. I mean, people only do it because it works.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
If the audience at some point just says, I'm tired of this, and we're talking at large scale, if people just stopped clicking on shock value stuff, we wouldn't see as much of it.
Yeah, and I think for someone that might be looking to accelerate that process, I think it's about finding ways to give people alternatives to where they can more actively tune out what they see on social media.
Yeah.
And that's where I come back to on, say, for example, ground game or community build up, is by having opportunities for people to get out there and what's the saying, go touch some grass. Look away from their phones, get engaged with people who, even if they don't think exactly alike, they're connecting with them on a more substantive level than what you might see in social media. That's how I would at least approach trying to get people away from that click culture.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, with everything that happened with COVID and the lockdowns and, there's like a loneliness epidemic going on in our country.
Yeah.
People are hungry for that. I think I was on meetup.com yesterday looking at some stuff with my girlfriend. We were trying to think about some meetup or group to join.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at that website. I used to do a lot more of that networking stuff. Right after COVID, I was doing a lot of it for my business when it started back up and people went back into society. But in the 2 years since, or 3 years, or however long it's been, there's probably 3 times as many different meetups going on in Austin, and it's like, I think that's that effect. Where people
Absolutely.
are like, people are wanting. They realize that social media doesn't. It's like the processed sugar of human interaction.
Yeah,
right?
I think there is something where a lot of people recognize that as instinctively unhealthy for us.
Yeah.
But yeah, COVID and the period of lockdowns made phones, made streaming services, made all of that a lot more accessible, and also was kind of the only game in town for a while. And it's hard to break away from that. And so, one thing I would encourage is, if you are trying to get that message out there more, make it that much easier for people to come to something. Make it appealing to somebody who, there's going to be a lot of anxiety in terms of coming out the house and going to meet people that, a lot of people haven't met new people in a real long time. Like when I go to church these days, like I used to be just kind of a butterfly, just kind of bouncing all over, and just talking to whomever. These days, I find myself a bit more reserved, and the instances of where I've felt most connected are the ones where it's been very easy for me to just jump into a conversation and presenting that, really rolling out that welcome mat.
Yeah, like just take that into consideration when setting up an event. Make it, roll out that welcome mat, so to speak. Like have a speaker, have an agenda, have things that can get people kind of out of their shell. Not having to go in and do all the work themselves and just start talking to people. That's intimidating. Right?
Yeah, and have it. And if you say you've got a group of people that are putting together an event, making it something where it's somebody's job to be bouncing around and talking to people that they don't recognize and who they think are new, and being able to say, hey, we haven't met before.
Making them feel at home.
Exactly. Yeah, and bringing them in and say, hey, let me introduce you to XYZ. The biggest thing about social media and technology in general right now is it makes things so easy.
Yeah.
Communication.
People like easy. That's why it's so addicting, right?
Yeah,
it's like,
immediate gratification. You don't have to do the work. Versus now, communication is really, really hard, especially in-person communication. So finding ways to make that easier and make it more accessible and to just make it generally welcoming for any ground game, for any grassroots organization, that's the exact kind of advice I'm going to give.
That's terrific advice. And the wheels are turning as you're saying that. It's like just eliminating those barriers, right? Maybe it's have an event on the weekend and on the week, in the middle of the week, because there's certain people who won't be able to make it on a Wednesday, or they have their kids on the weekend.
Yep. And that comes right back to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
Recognize that, for young folks, it might be really easy for them to go out and meet up for drinks. Happy hour somewhere. But for somebody who's interested in raising 3 kids, being able to go to an event means, having to get a babysitter, having to make sure that everything's coordinated. So finding ways to where you can present that to them and make it as easy as possible for them to come in and get involved, that's going to be key for any grassroots organization and messaging.
Fascinating. So I have a hard time. I love that advice. I think it's spot on. It's really resonating with me as you're kind of giving this pitch, so to speak. Social media is just such a big part of communication. It's like, I don't think, if you wanted to create a strategy on communication, I don't think you can avoid it.
Yeah, at minimum, you have to have a presence, because otherwise somebody will fill that void for you and start putting information out there that is either inaccurate or is just actively going against you.
Right.
You have to, in any field of communication, you need to have some sort of presence to be able to just have that message present and available for people to look at. Because again, that's meeting them where they are. If they are on social media, you do have to meet them there, at least to start.
One thing I've seen the Forward Party do through some of the communication, and I've heard talked about, I'm interested to get your take on this if you're able to, is, in that sense, what people are seeing on social media from people on the left or the right is, people throwing grenades and, dunking on people and just all those sorts of things, just trying to get someone, right? And fighting, basically. What I've seen from the Forward Party is more of that just difference. We're not going to fight. We're going to be positive. We're going to be, logical, reasonable. It's in theory sounds nice, but it's like, does that sell? Will that work long term?
Well, look, at the end of the day, speaking from 5 years on Capitol Hill in DC, you cannot avoid the fight.
Yeah.
Somebody is going to bring the fight to you. And, there are times in our communication strategies of where we will tell our clients, like, this is the time to fight. This is the time to say something back. This is the time to be very stern. The key thing is not whether or not you fight, it's how you fight.
Oh, wow.
Being able to do so in a way that is respectful but still gets that key messaging point across, people recognize that. And I think right now, I think you've correctly identified that there are certain elements across the political spectrum that they really relish in that fight. They really, seeing somebody get dunked on is the point for some of them. And, and that's sad, but it's also unserious politics as well. And I think
serious issues that we need to be very serious about.
Yeah. And, I think that's something where there is an appetite for a lot of people out there to see someone push back against that. But you're not going to be able to push back against somebody who relishes the fight without being able to find a way to fight back. You cannot just simply say, we're not going to do that at all, because at the end of the day, they will just continue dunking on it. You have to present an alternative option.
You have to have that presence, like you're saying, or they'll fill the gap.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very interesting. And one of the things I think is a cautionary line of thinking with any third party movement that's like a, meet in the middle type of a party, is you don't want to be that kumbaya person. You don't want to be like, everybody should just get along, even though people should. But it's like, that's not realistic. That's, you're a pushover kind of thing.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, these issues are important. The stuff that goes on in political discussion, particularly at the policy level, a lot of these things have major impacts on the daily lives of people.
Yeah.
They might not always recognize that as such, but it can have tremendous impact. And these discussions are worth having, and they are debates that are worth having. And simply saying, well, why can't we all get along, I think just dismisses the notion that there are conflicting interests and that, it's not necessarily about getting along, but finding a situation that people can live with.
Right.
And also being willing to pivot on that as well, because situations change. And, no policy is going to be perfect forever, and things do have to change. And the big risk that you see oftentimes is by refusing to address it and not have serious conversations, not have the adult conversations.
Everything gets worse.
Yeah, exactly. Things get worse. And that makes it that much more difficult to then come back and have that discussion. So I think presenting a front of where we're not afraid to have the tough discussions, but we're going to do so in a way that is respectful of people's opinions and in a manner that at the end of the day, you can come back and say, no matter what, I can live with the situation as it is. That's going to be crucial.
It's almost like having the conversation on our terms in a way that you're having the discussion about these very serious disagreements, very different ways of viewing a situation, but kind of staying above the fray, so to speak.
Yeah. Or again, you don't want to be out of the fray because, again, they will fill that presence for you. But how you present it, how you push back on it, that's going to make all of the difference. And because at the end of the day, we are still going through this phase of where social media is rewarding the folks that make the most bombastic claims and make the biggest splash. But eventually, at least under my theory of how the progress of technology impacts messaging and communication, eventually that's not going to be the case. And being able to present on those mediums while presenting yourself as effectively the adult in the room will eventually be rewarded. It's just more of a question of determining the best way to do so.
Yeah. So ultimately what I'm getting out of that is if you do want to, make a splash on social media, you do have to still kind of play by these rules of being a little bombastic, being a little combative.
Yeah.
But, doing it in the right way.
Yeah. And being able to criticize somebody without going after them personally.
Their character.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's an art form and it's well practiced. And I think some people might even view it as oh, that's cliche. That's that's cute, and kind of view it as naive right now.
Definitely.
But I think it's odd because in any other situation in life that you find yourself in, whether it's business, family, friendship, being able to have mature conversations about difficult situations is just a part of life.
Right. Those are the people that end up getting elevated. People
Exactly.
who can turn the temperature down and lead the group, not divide the group.
And so, at the end of the day, so many of these issues are driven by real problems that people really are facing in the world.
Absolutely.
So being able to find ways that communicate that and effectively represent it without diving into just this slugfest, that's the holy grail in terms of politics right now.
Yeah. When you talk about meeting people where they're at, people are angry. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are angry. A lot of people are disillusioned. This is a conversation I've had with several folks in the Forward Party and that I hear kind of behind the scenes a lot and again, this is a hypothetical third party. This is not advice that you are giving or anything like that. We're just spitballing here. We're meeting people where they're at, or a party is going to meet people where they're at. They're angry. They're disillusioned. Do we need an enemy? Do we need to do something with that anger?
Yeah. And to do something with that anger is what I would really focus in on. I think, anger is a natural emotion. That is something, one. And very powerful. And it's something that everyone experiences it. It is not unique to, a particular political group. It's something that ultimately anger is there for a reason, and it's there to help us recognize when a situation is unacceptable.
Needs to change.
Yeah. Taking that anger and channeling it towards a positive force to where it can put one on the path towards change, but in a manner that is not tearing other things down as they go. And I take that a bit from almost a spiritual perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Of where I might have a situation that I'm extremely angry with someone in, but ultimately I want to see a more positive version of the situation I'm finding myself in. Being able to present that in a way that it accurately expresses what I'm angry about, that frustration, but moves the ball forward in a way of where ultimately you can see things getting better. I think that's something that people are struggling with a lot right now because, particularly in social media, it's just that ball of anger constantly. You're not seeing anything really moving forward in terms of actual progress on these issues. They just seem to be getting worse.
Absolutely.
And I do think that there are some people out there who, they have built business structures on this of where they are facilitating that anger and helping it grow more because that, at least in the short term, provides
ad revenue,
clicks, financial benefits, and it's something where that is part of the ecosystem that you deal with in a communication structure right now. But being able to put that forward in a way of where it's more proactive and something where it's guiding people towards a solution rather than just in this doom cycle of anger, hate, and frustration.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's so tough, right? That's not easy. That's not an easy problem.
Yeah, if I knew the exact way to do that, I would be a multimillionaire right now. That's the big puzzle that I think so many people are trying to solve right now is how do we take this anger that has been unlocked and turn that into something where it's positive and just generally affirming for society rather than just destructive.
We're better off than where we were or where we're at this moment.
Yeah.
Right. And you see the opposite effect, as you mentioned, so often, where it's like, rather than if we have the two major parties, which have these basically, polar opposite viewpoints on any number of issues, if they come to the table with these extreme perspectives, like let's say something like gun control, for example, people on the left saying, let's get rid of all the guns. People on the right saying, we do nothing. Actually, more open carry. Less,
more guns. That's what will make folks safe, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, no. And the end result is we do nothing. And it's like, we can't do nothing on so many different things. And it's like, that is the most frustrating part. And you see more and more doubling down on the extremes. Because the base of the parties, they like it. They're the people who are in that world, they like it. They like to feel like what they're saying is correct and blame the other side, but all that does is make the problem stick around a little longer, make it worse.
And, I think there's a situation where people get drawn into these debates of where they will see somebody that they partially agree with, but because that person is presenting what appears to be a solution, they gravitate towards that. And I think that there needs to be healthy debate in terms of how do we find actual solutions? What is going to be the common ground on this? But so much of that means you got to break away from that anger cycle. And there is a legitimate issue there of where, particularly in this tribal structure that we find ourselves in right now, it's hard to break away from those.
Yeah.
If you venture too far off the beaten path in terms of what the particular norm is within your political tribe, that can lead to ostracization for some folks.
Absolutely.
And the general perspective or term for that would be, running into cancel culture, of where folks will get actively penalized by their peers within their social structures for saying the wrong thing. And because we've built into that nature, the tribalism has just really made it difficult to break out and have those actual discussions.
Yeah, it's a tough problem. And it's being realistic isn't something that is very sexy. Like when we talk about like the gun issue example here again, it's like, it's not realistic for people who are pro-second. I'm pro-Second Amendment. Well, that's besides the point of this conversation here. It's not realistic for 50% of the country who has deep distrust in the government, and probably 80% of the country distrusts the government, I would say at this point, or institutions, to give up, their guns. That's an unrealistic goal. And it's like, for someone on the left who's saying, we need to ban these things, it's like, yeah, okay, maybe, but like, that's never going to happen in this current environment. It's an unrealistic outcome. So by you sticking with this, idealistic position, all that does is, leave things the way that they are.
Yeah. And, from my perspective on that, and strictly my opinion, I think that that's something of where there needs to be a shift in terms of goals on that, of recognizing that the goal is to, and this issue at least, is to save lives.
Right.
Now,
and that's something everyone would agree with.
Yes.
Let's have less shootings, mass shootings in our country.
Yep. But
every single person would agree with that.
I think the issue, though, is that you've now run into where, for some folks at least, the goal itself is more about the object. It's more about the gun in this case. And that's something of where, that's the moment that you get caught up in that, of where it's, we need to protect guns, or we need to eliminate guns. You have now gotten into a polarized section that is away from the initial goal that everyone can actually agree on.
Yeah.
So helping bring people back to the notion of, here is the actual goal, that I think is something that on a communications front, that's how I would be promoting something like that, is saying we need to get this back to, this is saving lives and doing anything, all of the above, that can make that happen.
Interesting. Avoid the phrases that are particularly polarizing while having an aggressive, stance, not taking a passive stance or
not singing Kumbaya,
Yeah.
not like, oh, we're all going to get along if only everyone would listen to me. Like, everyone's all for compromise, so long as it means everybody is changing.
Compromise with me,
compromise to my position. I mean, I think the key difference there is, it's being assertive with the message.
Yes.
Putting that out there and being firm but not inflexible. You stake out your point, but recognize that a well-reasoned mind can differ. And I think that's something where, from a personal philosophy perspective, I'm sorry, I've got like a fly.
Yeah, there's gnats all over you. It's like the one debate with the fly on.
Oh
Mike
yeah,
Pence.
yeah. Oh man, it's just
This might go viral.
Yeah,
Dylan and the
Dylan
and the gnat.
Crisis communication situation right there. But yeah, it's a situation of where being able to define your position in a manner that is, one, clearly drawn out, but is still open to others and enabling that conversation.
Yeah.
Extremely difficult to do, but that's the goal you got to strive for in a political circumstance of where you're trying to break out from the binary aspect of dueling forces that are just at complete loggerheads.
I want to go back to the anger. Again, wheels are turning as you're talking.
Yeah.
What about directing the anger towards the goal, right? We need to change the goal. We need to change re-identify the goal. Is there a way to direct that anger at this, the way we're looking at things? I mean, it's not a group, so that's like kind of more of a hurdle, I think, because the group identities is such a natural part of human nature. So that's deep in our lizard brain, so to speak. But is there a way we can do that with something that's like more, ambiguous, like a goal or this system or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very in-depth question, and I think there's even some spiritual and social elements of that I'm certainly no expert on.
Sure.
But I think that finding positive outlets for anger is, one, always just a good idea in general. But two, it can actually enable creativity and looking at situations differently, of where finding an element that you can pour that anger to, but in a positive way, is going to have much more pronounced effect than if you are taking that anger and just spilling it onto social media. I think
giving people a way to use that anger.
Yeah, and in a way that helps also transition it away from anger and more towards hope for change.
Yes,
because that's something of where I think that the typical conversation you have with somebody about politics right now is not particularly hopeful. No. I don't think for anyone, really. I think
extremely negative, extremely pessimistic. We're doomed.
Yeah, and particularly of just this is a situation of where, no matter my political perspective, I think something terrible is happening. But finding a way to say, okay, how am I taking that first step towards making it better in a way that is also inviting to others? Because so often what I often see in my perspective, at least when it comes to in trying to bring in others, it's trying to just energize the particular group I'm already with.
Yeah.
Versus how can I make this something of where, how can I bring other people who might view things differently? How can I change their mind, or at least get them to open up to a different way? And that takes more vulnerability. It's more about putting not just your idea, but yourself out there. And that's, again, that's an intimidating challenge for just about anybody, because it's, especially in this environment, very easy for people to criticize and just really dogpile on folks that are trying to create positive change.
Right. Yeah, the vulnerability thing, it's like, that's risky.
Oh, yeah.
A politician can say, wouldn't it be great if we lived in a world where politicians just admitted when they were wrong about things more often, if ever?
Yeah.
You just can't do that.
No.
Because you'd get run over.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, then, yeah, the attack ad writes itself.
Yeah.
Of where it's just, you just play that clip over and over again, and yeah, and it makes it difficult to return back on an area that maybe you overstepped in, or maybe you didn't have a firm understanding on. Finding a nuanced way to work around that's one of the greatest challenges you will run into in the political world, just bar none, especially in an environment where any step backwards can be construed by a particular group as this is a step too far.
Yeah. It's a hard challenge, but it's an important one. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I've got one last question for you, Dylan, as we wrap up here. So you spent some time working on Capitol Hill to start your career.
I did, yeah.
What was the most unexpected aspect of that job, or something that people just would not think of, when they imagine what it would be like working on Capitol Hill?
Well, I think there's a couple of different answers there. I mean, the one that comes most to mind, at least when I was there, was how much people across the political spectrum actually get along and are actually spending time together. There's a lot of the friends I made in D.C. were, I worked on for Republican members, but I had lots of friends that were Democrats, and some like staunchly Democratic, but there was still that mutual respect of the profession itself.
Sure.
As far as like what might surprise people in terms of like the general operations, I think as much as it might seem that like there are grand schemes going on, and that there's this big map that's kind of leading these different folks, and there's this big playbook of this is what we do in this circumstance, a lot more of it, especially right now, is it's reactionary. And it's, in the House, it's 435 people all reacting to each other and their constituencies back home.
It's not very comforting, Don.
I mean, it's in a way that is so wonderfully democratic. I actually kind of find it comforting, because that means change is readily possible. It's something of where the right group of people coming together can quickly make moves to right a wrong. And it's something of where unique coalitions can form because of it. And, so much of it in the political world right now is caught up in kind of this, you're on my team or you're against me.
Yeah.
In reality, when these guys are talking to each other, when these representatives, these senators are working with one another, there are commonalities that you typically wouldn't find, personal relationships between members that are, what you would think are staunchly opposed, where they actually have issues that they completely agree on, and they form friendships. These are people that they work with day in, day out. And as much as it might seem like it's one big fight, again, so much of like the friendliness aspect, that's just not going to drive viewership. That's not going to catch those ratings, and so it doesn't get as much attention. And so, I am actually an optimist when it comes to, the overall direction that we're heading. I think we're in a unique circumstance right now of where the overall party influences are having an impact that is outsized of what they're meant to be. And it's making it difficult for direct representative democracy. But I do think that, the social wheels are turning in terms of addressing that and finding new ways to reflect it. And I think that ultimately, our system, as fallible as it can be, is still something that is completely salvageable and workable and can do a lot of good for a lot of people. And
100%.
And I just always have hope that, I do not believe America is doomed. I think our best years are actually ahead of us, and the right collection of people coming together and working together and recognizing that they have differences, but working to overcome those, that is our greatest strength, and that's something that, countries around the globe have aimed to replicate. And that's something where we can take pride in that. There is always an opportunity to recapture that and start working back towards it.
Love it. That's beautifulully put, and that's, I think, a great place to wrap it up.
We'll put that one as the tagline right there.
Yeah, we'll put an American flag waving, the national anthem going on in the background. If I can get
like a framed copy of
that, we'll get an eagle flying through.
Yeah, just have just the national anthem softly playing in the background.
There we go.
It'll look good. It'll
be on social media soon. Dylan, thank you so much.
Hey,
this was
my
awesome.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, and looking forward to our next 2-year anniversary edition.
Absolutely, I am too. Anything you want us to plug as far as your company or anything like that? Where can people find?
Oh well, yeah. So the last thing I would say is just if you or your organization is looking for communications representation, whether that's strategic communications, whether that is for PR or crisis communications, the Mach 1 group, we are a team built up of government experts, of communications experts, of former news media members, and we are there right here in Austin to help you get your message across. And feel free to look us up online, and we're here.
Like Ghostbusters, if you got a crisis, call Mach 1.
Yeah. We're going to start working on the jingle now. We're going to make that happen.
There we go. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening at home. Thanks again, Dylan, for being on the podcast today. As always, we want to hear from you. We want to hear who you want to have on the podcast, what issues are on your mind, and we'll see you again next week. All right.
That was great, man.
Hell yeah.